Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the 13 on the Coivecast. I'm Ross Williams, your host as always. Adam, hello mate, how you doing?
Oh, mate, it's interesting this one. Neither of us in the hot seat.
For the first time.
Hmm.
For the first time, we do have a guest for this third episode of My 13, and it is at Cast Rugby Shirts on Twitter. It is Steve McNichol. We've just recorded something extra special with Steve. But while we had him here, of course, he's going to give his 13, his all time 13 of Castleford greats. I'm really excited to listen to this because obviously you'll have listened to our first two episodes. Me and Adam have got similar-ish teams because obviously we're
Yeah.
slightly pretty much the same generation. You're a slightly different generation.
Older Ross is what you mean, I think.
I
Older.
tried to be polite about it, but no. At least obviously you're gonna have heard and seen of players that we simply just didn't have. We just simply didn't see. I mentioned kind of Adrian Bowles and players like that on my episode. Yeah, he'd be in my team. I just didn't see him.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to hear about some players that we've not mentioned in our first two episodes. So yeah, Steve, excited to run down your 13.
Yeah, I have to say, I found it so difficult. You two guys both said on your podcast how difficult you'd found it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've got more players to go at.
Yeah.
So where you're choosing one of two or two of three, I'm kind of looking, going, which one of these four players do you actually pick here?
Absolutely.
But I think I've got it nailed. I think.
It
I
is
did
really,
change
really
one
good.
today. I'll tell you when I get to it. I did change one literally today. But yeah, I think I've got it nailed.
It wouldn't be my 13 without a last minute change.
No.
I think everyone's going to do that. Just in terms of your not ground rules per se, but your earliest memories of casting. Because obviously, what kind of year are we going from?
Oh, so I've always been a Cass fan. So I'm just over 40 now, and being at Cass is one of my earliest childhood memories. Vaguely, both my parents were Cass fans. My parents had their first date at the Weldon Road end. So that's kind of how ingrained it is in our family. My dad, they met inside just so my dad didn't have to pay for my mum to get in,
Superb.
just in case he
Superb.
didn't just in case he didn't like her. Um, so I kind of always remember being down at Cass, but I think when you're so young, you're not necessarily that focused on the game. And I think I kind of started understanding the game and kind of being interested in watching the game rather than just running around the concourse, kind of early 90s. So we're kind of going early 90s. I think the game that cemented kind of that lifelong support was probably that Regal Trophy final.
Yeah.
Being there in that crowd at that end at Headingley was just unbelievable. And that moment, I think I've been chasing that moment again ever since. I've not seen a cast performance since then that quite matched up to that. But the atmosphere that day and the kind of buzz, the game, that kind of cemented my kind of lifelong support, I think. And since the early 90s, and then basically that Regal Trophy final, kind of always been that kind of supporter up until now.
Perfect. And obviously, I've not seen your team. This is going to be
Yeah.
a surprise to me and Adam, as it will be to the listener. I dare say there might be one or two from that Regal Trophy final win potentially. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into it. Fullback number one, the man at the back, the man directing the troops. Plenty of good options.
Yeah, I'm fairly straight for this one. Fairly straightforward. Graham Stedman. Um, so Steady was just sublime from fullback. His anticipation, his ability to see a gap in the defensive line and step through it. Pace, he was incredibly quick. It's not maybe something you think of when you think of Graham Stedman, but he had a serious bit of pace about him. And I think the reason I pick him is that he was the first player I think that offered that level of attack from fullback. So traditionally, you'd had your fullback was a very much a defensive player. They caught the up and unders. They caught they tackled the player who made a break. They ushered the winger into touch, and they were very much perceived to be a defensive minded player. And Steady changed all that, because he was an attacking weapon, from fullback. If he picked if that long kick, when he kick returned, he could go full length of the pitch. And I think there's a video of him scoring a try at Headingley in that really amber away shirt, kind of going from one. But that was regular. That just happened to be on TV. Steady used to do that regularly. And I think the only player I've seen kind of near it is Zach. So I think Zach Hardacre could do it as well, where you could break that defensive line immediately and either score the try himself or put us on the front foot, so a try is inevitable. And Steady, I think, was the first player who really offered an attacking threat from fullback when he was picking the ball up and returning it, but also when we were on the attack. He was the first fullback you really saw join in and kind of putting himself into the line and then firing the ball out to the winger. So yeah, Steady is a definite kind of. He was a game changer, I think, as a fullback, and was a Great Britain fullback. During his time at Cass, was recognised and scored that try for Great Britain when they beat Australia down under. I think one of the few times that that Great Britain had beaten Australia. So yeah, and what I loved about Steady is he was really creative as well. So he would often kind of put that chip and chase over the defensive line, even on a kick return. So I remember a number of times he would be returning a kick and you'd be expecting him to kind of hit the line or try and find a gap, and he'd kick it over the defenders who were trying to close him down. And you're like, he's done a chip and chase from his own 40 and just sailed in to score. And yeah, he was a game changer as far as I'm concerned in terms of how fullbacks play the game.
Perhaps that's why he made the transition to a defence coach in rugby union so well, because he was willing to kick it on the first tackle. Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, he's one of those players who I've grown up hearing about. Really, one of those kind of superstars of Cass. And a game changer was honestly the word in mind before you said it. Obviously, when you referenced Zach as well, I think there's good fullbacks and there's real game changers. People I can really kind of make a difference, not just be solid, but be beyond that. And Steady was one of those guys. And from an era of transfer fees as well, I believe Cass paid quite a hefty transfer fee.
I think he's still our record signing. All this time later, I think he's still our record signing.
It's a weird thing, isn't it? That just, I mean, I guess it's not a weird thing. It's purely just a monetary issue. But like, transfer fees just gone out of the game, really, haven't they? I mean, they still. I mean, I know Leeds have paid a couple this off season in terms of Brodie Croft and Andy Ackers, and they still knock around a little bit, but it's not really something you hear about too often, really.
It's a
kind of transfer
rare
fees and
yeah,
I know Steady was a fair bit of cash to bring him over, and more than kind of lived up to it, I think.
Absolutely, and it was interesting. I saw some footage of him playing for. He's playing for the All Stars, the Rugby League All Stars charity team. And then I think I saw footage of him one day, and the next day they broke the news of Niall Evalds' injury, and I genuinely thought, how old is the latest comeback in Super League history? How old? And then I looked it up and I thought, no, even if he could, he probably wouldn't. But he's still got it. He's watched that footage. He has still got everything he used to have. Absolute class.
We watched him at Massey's testimonial game, didn't we, for the All Stars? And it looks like he's good nick, isn't he?
Absolutely. He just looks no different, which is what made me think this bloke looks no different from when he was ripping it up against teams in the 90s.
Yeah, and
yeah, I was saying for Massey's testimonial, we talked about Bruffy, we've talked about, Wagger runs about like a headless chicken on a daily basis, I think. But the other guy that were kind of running around with them was Graham Steadman, and God knows how many years he's got on those two.
Oh, a fair few, and it's kind of interesting. Almost a bit of a shame, really, that it's up to him what he wants to do, I suppose. But he hasn't been involved in the coaching side of things too much in rugby league. Obviously, he did. I believe he was defence coach for Scotland Rugby Union.
Yeah,
I think,
Scotland and Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the long line of rugby league players. Obviously, Andy Farrell's probably the best coach in rugby union at the moment, with what he's done at Ireland and probably the Lions in the next couple of years. Yeah, it's almost a shame that he's not come back over and coach more in league and coach more to the standard he almost certainly could do. Maybe it's something for the future if he fancies it, but ultimately.
And again, I don't know how well paid rugby league coaching is.
Probably not that well, if we're being honest.
If he's pursued another career, he may well be financially better off. And as we've seen with Danny Orr, who would have thought that? Obviously, I don't know his salary, but who would have thought that Danny Orr would then go and join the police? Yeah. But these people, there are careers outside rugby league, and I'm guessing the game doesn't pay highly enough to retain people who could go on and financially do better elsewhere.
100%. We can dream. Okay, fullback. a more than worthy recipient in Graham Stedman with the number 1 shirt, which brings us to the wing position and number 2, Steve.
Number 2, same era, St. John Ellis. So this is going on that basis of players who you just love to watch. Singe was he was just box office. Yeah, every time he touched that ball, you thought something could happen. You thought genuinely, you thought he could score wherever he got it on the field. He was so evasive, so fast, had such a step that you could almost sense the crowd every time Singe got the ball lean forward in their seats or just stand on their tiptoes. And he was that kind of player that people just always expected something to happen when he's got the ball in his hands. Anywhere in broken play, he could fashion a break. He had this great shimmy where he'd stand up his opposite winger or opposite centre. He'd kind of move side to side to side to side and then go. It must have been an absolute nightmare to defend. I don't think he ever ran straight. And he had this this duck that he had. So he would literally duck under tackles. So he would put a step and then duck, and players would dive over the top of him, and he'd be gone. And he was just so exciting to watch. You know, those fast feet, and strong as well. You know, not the biggest, but still a strong player. And obviously he had that season where he scored a ridiculous amount of tries that was the club record for many years. Yeah. And he was just so exciting to watch. He also was a character. You know, he would be the one coming back down the touchline, getting the fans up, kind of encouraging, interacting with the fans, and everyone just loved to watch him play. So I think, number 2, St. John Ellis.
It's going to be a theme of this team, of course, obviously with my generation, but absolutely one of those players, probably top 3 that I wish I'd seen. Yeah. That I wish I'd seen in the flesh. Just an absolute, for all the reasons you've just said, but just, I mean, you look at the tapes of just a physical specimen as well, a proper athlete, which weren't always the case, but back in those days in rugby league as well, just a proper athlete who could do it all, as you say. Any thoughts on St. John Ellis? Obviously, again, a little bit before our time, Adam, but
yeah, we spoke on your episode and said that the kind of 3 wingers, like class wingers that you're picking from of this generation. Obviously, we spoke about Justin Carney, Dennis Almona, Greg Eden, but one I had in the back of my mind when I was making that comment of just thinking a little bit further back with the amount of people that talk about him, the amount of raps that lad gets. St. John Ellis is the one that I would have up there with those 3, especially in the last. If you take it just back to the kind of 90s for your criteria. So it's no shock to hear that he's in your team, Steve.
One of those as well where I think we've said it before on our episodes about how revered players are from fans of other teams. I think when you ask non-cast fans about those teams of kind of the 90s, he's probably one of the names they'd say. Probably one of the first names they'd say. I think he's well revered by fans of other clubs, and often that's the highest praise you can ever get. I think, and a player that other teams feared, and that's ultimately what your teams. I think St. John Ellis, fantastic addition to this 13 at number 2. We'll move to the centres then. We'll leave you the wing position until we get to number 5. So number 3, here we go.
I promise it's not all the Regal Trophy winning team.
When I said that initially, I didn't think it was going to be. I don't think it was going to be all of them.
We should have gone left side first, maybe. But Richie Blackmore. And again, his partnership with St. John Ellis was just incredible. But Richie had everything you'd want in a modern day centre, and I think again he broke the mould in the way that he played that centre game. He had the size, he was strong, he was fast. His hands was phenomenal. So the speed that he could get that ball out wide, that catch and pass from left to right, which he's perceived to be the more difficult skill. The speed he could do that was just incredible. And he's one of the reason that Singe scored a lot of his tries, because he used to be able to create that space for Singe to exploit. So his hands were lovely, and he had that ability to fend with one hand and pass with the other. So the amount of times that we scored off the back of one of Richie Blackmore's plays where he'd lead with his left arm, fend the defender off, and sometimes it'd be like men against boys. He'd be swatting players off. Sometimes you see those videos of big kids who were playing against other kids who were the same age, but obviously they're just not as physically mature as her. It was a bit like that. sometimes watching Richie. He would bump players off as if they were kids on a playground. And he'd bump them off with his left, and he would flick that pass out with his right hand to his winger. And I think I've not seen anyone who does that as well, maybe apart from Jamie Lyon. He had that ability as well to go into contact and then flick that pass out to the winger. And the other thing with Richie is that he was a monster in defence. Defensively, he was just it's scary. I would have hated to have played against him. I mean, I wouldn't fancy playing against any Super League player, but him of all people. He used to make a habit of dragging out his opposite centre into touch. And they weren't even going that way to start with. So they'd try and step him on the inside, and he'd literally grab him and drag him out into touch. He was strong as a bear, was the bloke. And so defensively, the amount of times he must have won us that ball back with that kind of defensive effort and dragging his opposite centre. Sometimes, 5-10 metres. Maybe it's something you won't get away with these days. Yeah. But he wasn't dragging him on the floor. He was literally picking him up and bustling him out. So maybe he would get away with it. But yeah, absolutely class player. Had everything you'd want in a centre. Obviously New Zealand international during his time at CAS as well. So, high quality elite player. And then went back to NRL, did really well playing in NRL. Then got his copybook, come and play these. But I think I'm right in saying he scored the first ever grand final try. Richie Blackmore, absolutely phenomenal player, and certainly a definite pick. It wasn't should I choose him or someone else? Definite right centre. Richie Blackmore, by far and away the best I've seen.
Love that. A lot of fans of my generation, we hear from our parents about these players. This is one my dad talks about all the time. He always mentions Richie Blackmore when he talks about it. He's going to be on the podcast. I don't know whether that episode's going out first. No, it won't. This will be first. My dad's will be afterwards. I would not be surprised to see Richie Blackmore in his team as well, for the very same reasons you said. You kind of touched on the point I was going to say towards the end there, and I'll raise it to you, Adam. It's just a different generation, isn't it? It's a different time. We're signing players now in the 2023 off-season going into 2024. We're just about minding to sign tier 3 or tier 2 internationals due to the quota restrictions, the kind of stuff, the visa restrictions more than anything. So obviously guys from PNG, the Liam Horns, etc. And obviously the guys from the Lebanese team. This is the guy with 25 caps for the Kiwis playing down Weldon Road. I mean, it's just it's crazy for us to kind of fathom that. That was not that long ago, was it? No, that we were talking about genuine rugby league superstars,
like proper internationals. And I don't want to take away from sort of Papua New Guinea and Lebanon, but to be able to play for New Zealand, we've had
quite 15 tries for the Kiwis, by the way.
We've had a few New Zealand internationals, but not many that are currently in that team. Like obviously Richie Blackmore was obviously making appearances for the Kiwis while at CAS. We can look at sort of recent examples of players that have been New Zealand internationals, and obviously looking at Jake Webster, Ben Roberts. They played for the Kiwis, but it was a while before joining CAS.
This is simultaneous. This is simultaneous.
This is at the same time. Yeah. So it shows the amount of talent that fella held. And obviously, I mean, it's going to be a kind of running theme for me and Ross. Another guy that I'd have loved to watch play.
Yeah, 100%.
Especially in a CAS shirt.
100%. Can we get away from the Regal Trophy team? Let's see.
Yes, we can.
Other centre spot. Who's your number 4, Steve?
Michael Shen.
We know this one.
Hey. Shenny, I mean, what can you say that you two guys haven't already said about the bloke? Just one of the best in all aspects of his play, but also his leadership qualities, his impact on the team, the driving of standards. Just a top rugby league player and top professional. Although I found a stat, or I've kind of tracked back to a stat that I don't think either of you two mentioned, so I'm gonna use it. That between 2014 and 2020, no player in Super League had more try assists than Michael Shen.
Wow.
And I know there'll be some players who had more in a season, but no player had more try assists or try involvement. So when you add up the assists and the tries that he did score, and there's sometimes this perception that he never passed.
Yeah, I was just
But
about to make
Talk about
that
that.
point.
he was
Rubbish.
this guy was often had the most assists for a centre. So all right, he might not have topped the charts. You know, you have your halfbacks and your kickers as topping the try assist charts. But when you look down to 5th or 6th, he's the first centre that's there on try assists regularly.
Yeah.
And that misconception that he didn't pass just isn't true. And as I say, more try involvements than any other player in Super League between 2014 and 2020. Which and bearing in mind he barely played half a game in 2016.
It's the season, pretty much, yeah.
It's the season, and he's still got that kind of stat. One of the other things I'd say about Shenny is that line he used to run, that decoy.
Yeah.
That is what produced the space for, firstly, Luke Dawn, who I think you picked, Adam, and Ross, Zach Hardacre. That line that he used to run, that angled decoy run, was the space that Zach Hardacre and Luke Dawn exposed. And they exposed it and either scored themselves or shipped it out to Greg Eden, Dennis Olney, whoever you want to put on that left wing. So whilst he might not have the stats for being involved in those tries, they don't happen without Michael Shenton's decoy running. And he was exceptional at creating space for his fullback as well, and so important in the modern game, that kind of that ability to create space for your extra pivot. Michael Shenton in at left centre.
The only ever present so far. Yeah. So far, the only ever present. He might be an ever present for some time, I think, in this series, and for good reason. Just an absolute a coach's dream, I would imagine, Mark Shenton, for the reasons you've just stated. And I think for the critics he did have, and I dare say the critics he had probably didn't know a great deal what they're talking about. If we're being honest, I dare say that they should just speak to Darryl Powell, and I'm sure he would absolutely wax lyrical about the bloke he made captain. He didn't make him captain for no reason, did he?
Defensively good as well. I mean, not just an attack. Defensively, really strong as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe not as demonstrative as Richard Blackmore, for example, but tactically, perfect. Absolutely.
And he looked after Greg Eden. You know, defensively, he looked after Greg Eden, and we can all acknowledge, you know, most wingers aren't great defensively, right? It's not a dig at Greg. But to be able to organise his winger as well and look after his own channel, brilliant.
Yeah, no easy task. No easy task. That brings us on to the wing then. Who is on number 5?
Greg Eden.
There we go. He's got his man. There we go.
yeah. Very much a two pairings, isn't it? Blackmore and Ellis on one side, Shenton Eden on the other. Just an instinctive finisher. The most instinctive finisher I think I've seen play the game at Cass, and possibly ever. I know he's got his faults. He had a lot of errors in him. But when it came to who do you want to be receiving that ball with half a yard of space in front of him, Greg Eden, or Dennis Olney. And I had that same dilemma. It was interesting. I kind of looked up some stats because I think, Adam, you were talking around Denny's strike rate. And of course, Denny was with us for 2 seasons, and his strike rate was phenomenal. You're right, and you were kind of saying Greg's strike rate's not quite as high, which is fair. But if you actually took Greg's best 2 seasons, then his strike rate's comparable. That 17 and 18 season before he started having to play a lot more at fullback. So I think their strike rates were pretty similar if you take the seasons where they scored their most tries and played most on the wing. But for me, just that consistency of Greg over so many years finishing those tries just edges it for me. And he did it in some big games. So I always remember that 2017 semi-final. He didn't score the try. He gave it inside to Luke Gale. But that's Greg Eden's try. That burst of pace on the outside to get around the edge. And even recently, you know, those 2 tries at Wakefield, one of the biggest games in the club history. And the blokes, did he score 2 or did he get 3? Can't remember.
I think he got the hat-trick, didn't he?
Did he finish? Did he finish the game with the try?
I think he finished the hat-trick in 80th minute.
Yeah. But those 2 tries particularly, I mean, the game was maybe won by the time he scored his last one. But those 2 tries, massive plays in the kind of history of the club, I think.
As you say, big moments. I think, to be honest, I'm trying to think now. If I think Eden, I think they try at Saints away. To be honest, I think the winner at Saints away, and it's literally one of those moments where you put the ball in any other cast player's hands in that situation, then they're not scoring.
Yeah.
And it's one of those. And I think we're already leading, so we didn't necessarily have to score even so.
Yeah.
Just yeah, I mean, for all the reasons I said in my episode, as we've said, I think it's very much of a muchness to an extent of those wing positions, particularly we talk about Denny. And obviously, we had Justin Carney thrown in there as well in terms of his try scoring rate and just the freakish nature of him, frankly.
Yeah.
But this modern generation, I think Greg's as good a shout as any, and it's testament to him that he gets in a side where you've got probably a slightly bigger case study of players to pick from as well. So yeah, a very, very good back line. I think it's fair to say.
Back line.
Let's move to halfbacks. Here's the litmus test, number 6.
I tried. I could justify someone, right? I'm not going to pick him, but Danny Orr.
Yeah.
I mean, Danny Orr comes into this conversation at 6, mostly from the time before he left and went to Wigan. But at that moment in time, he was probably the best halfback in the country.
Yeah.
Fast, creative, step, kicking game, everything. Danny Orr was poster boy of rugby league in terms of his ability. And obviously then got that big money move to Wigan, demonstrated his ability. Wigan at that time was still going out and signing who they thought were the best players in every position. So credit Danny Orr. I think I could put him in there, but I can't quite pick him in front of Rangi. I mean, Rangi, what can you say? The guy was a magician, wasn't he? Oh. He wasn't a rugby league player. He was a sorcerer. And the stuff that he did in game, I've never seen before. And I've not seen anyone do it since either. I've never seen people pull off the sort of stuff that he could pull off on a rugby league field. Just absolutely sensational talent. Fantastic to watch. I started, obviously I don't live locally anymore. And don't come to every game. But Rangi playing was a real draw. And I think that's the only time I could ever say that about an individual player. Obviously, I'd still gone and supported some games without him. But he was a massive draw to go and watch because I loved watching Rangi play. And I think that's probably true for almost everyone who kind of was there in those years that he played. Could defend as well. Really big hitter in defence. A halfback who could defend.
And a little bit high sometimes, but we forget about that. It's fine.
Occasionally. Only when it was warranted. And yeah, just an absolute pleasure to watch the guy play. One of the misconceptions I think that people have about him is that he couldn't play in a structure. But when Darryl Powell came in on the back end of 2013 and gave that structure, I think that was some of Rangi's best performances at the back end of 2013. And I think he showed that he could play in a structure. And one of the biggest kind of disappointments, I think, is that we never saw Rangi in a Darryl Powell team.
I talked about it on the podcast before. He had the 6 shirt, didn't he, in 2017? He was named number 6 in the squad.
Absolutely.
And obviously, he was only there for a matter of weeks. Because obviously Ben Roberts plays most of the season at 6. Actually wears number 16. People forget. I think that he was part of that 2017 setup, and I completely agree. Imagine if things had gone slightly. I mean, not that we necessarily needed him in the end, in the way the season went, but yeah, imagine you add some Rangi magic to that magic that was already there.
Absolutely,
would have been absolutely sensational. Yeah, you make perfect points. But Rangi, obviously, he's in a way he's probably the easiest pick in a lot of teams. I think because he's so different. He's so different to everything else we've seen. You talk about that draw. We mentioned it ourselves about the fact that you would go to see Rangi rather than the team, even sometimes. Adam, I think the fact that I know it's a sour spot for us, but like the fact that Marwan spent the money and brought him over, it's just testament to what he was. He was a spectacle himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Marwan Kukash came in wanting the best players to get more fans in at Salford. Yeah. He went out and bought Rangi Chase because was the draw in Super League. We talk about draws, and you can talk about when you talk about draws, you talk about like wrestling and stuff, and who are the main event kind of wrestlers and people that are in those big companies. Rangi Chase was the main event for a period of time in Super League. That's why he commanded the money from Marwan. and he backed it up for a lot of time at Cass on the field. When he moved to Salford, had his flashes. Obviously, we can all point to that behind the back flick because that gets banded about every year on social media.
Yeah.
So he's got the highlight plays. Just a troubled genius, unfortunately, which kind of is his only negative. But by God, was he good to watch.
Absolutely. And like I say, he's in my team as a 6, he's in your team as a 6.
Another ever present so far.
As a 6, that's 2 of presents. As we move to scrum half, number 7. Here we go.
Really hard pick, this one. Between two players who were very, very similar. So both organisation of the team, superb. Fantastic kicking game. Both of them long kicking game, short kicking game. The pass selection, the ability to know when to make the pass, when not to make the pass, the ability to pass either side. I was choosing between Brad Davis and Luke Gale. You can't get them both in. Firstly, Rangi's there. Secondly, both too similar. Both very much a 7, a controlling 7, and both fantastic to watch. And I found it really hard to pick which one of these I went with. But I went with Luke Gale. I went with Luke Gale, and I went with Luke Gale for a few reasons. Firstly, he was clutch. Yeah, if you're level and you need a drop goal, Luke Gale's your man. Yeah, maybe Mark Sneed, but Luke Gale is the man you want to throw that ball to. And I was worried to death when he signed for Wakefield. Because
you and me both.
Yeah, I had a third to that. Yeah.
You're just thinking this story is written for Luke Gale, isn't it? Because he made things happen for himself. Yeah, it's not luck. He makes things happen for himself. Yeah. And he's a massive competitor. He hates losing. He competes all day. And if you want anyone in that moment to kick you a conversion like he did in the semi-final to take it to Golden Point, or to land that 1 point, Luke Gale's the man you want stood underneath those posts. Obviously, everyone remembers 2017, which is fair, Man of Steel. But at that time, they were also doing the Albert Goldthorpe medal, which was for the most consistent player, and they used a scoring system similar to what we now use for Man of Steel.
It's the 3-point system, isn't it?
Yeah. Correct. Now, Luke Gale won that in 2015, 2016, and 2017. If we'd have been doing Man of Steel under the current point scoring system, he could have well gone 3 in a row there. Because he won the competition that was essentially using that scoring system of giving points out per game. Now, I'm not suggesting he should have done.
That's right from his debut season as well, was it? 2015, obviously, when he came in. I mean, so in a new system, having just been in a relegated side, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So he could have gone back to back on Man of Steel if Man of Steel at that point was under the current point scoring system. Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't. It was player vote, I believe. So,
funnily enough, Zach Hardwick won it in 2015.
Is that right?
It was their league's treble winning year, wasn't it? So
I guess they were always going to pick. And again, that different point scoring system is interesting, isn't it? Because there's the kind of perception that it maybe favours good players in not so great teams, which I think is probably true. But I don't think there's any doubt that Luke Gale in 15, 16 and 17 was sublime.
Absolutely. Not too much more to add on the back of that, to be honest. I think clutch is the word for him, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clutch is absolutely the word for him.
We wax lyrical about him in our episodes. I mean, I don't think there's much more for us to say about how much we admire the skill set that Luke Gale's got and what he brought to those cast teams during his time at the club.
Yeah. What I'm realising is I'm hopeful we're going to do 50, 100 episodes of this. We're really going to have to dive into the stats of these players everyone's going to pick out.
That'd be interesting.
to keep talking about things.
I mean, the Luke Gale, do you remember when the back end of last year when Wakefield were drawing with, was it Salford? Who were they drawing with? And they went into Golden Point.
Oh, it was Lee, wasn't it?
What, Lee?
Was it Lee? It was Lee.
Because it was Gaz O'Brien.
And I'd watched the Sky game and I was listening to it on the radio and I didn't know the Wakefield team. And all that's going through my head is, God, I hope Luke Gale's not playing.
Yeah.
I hope he is not playing.
I think I messaged Adam saying Gale's going to kick one.
Yeah, I couldn't
find
find the team. I couldn't find the team, and I'm thinking, I hope. And in the end, he was playing, but obviously that it just went the other way. But I think it's a mark of how well rated he is that we're all worried about him playing for another team 5 years down the track.
I mean, after half a year where he's been part-time roofing and playing for Keithley, and still there was that feat. Did he actually drop goal to take it to a golden point? I think he did.
He did.
Yeah, he managed to get it to golden point, just couldn't quite kick 2 drop goals because that's I mean, who does that?
Well, it'd have been prime Luke Gale, wouldn't it, to do that?
100%.
He was just outdone by maybe the only player in Super League more clutch than him.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The guy for O'Brien somehow.
Once a tiger, always a tiger.
Absolutely. There's the backs. It is pretty phenomenal so far. So we move to the forward pack and number 8, the first prop forward position.
Yep. Firstly, someone I didn't pick, but I think deserves a mention. Danny Nutley. So Danny Nutley, you were talking earlier about players like Richard Blackmore playing at Cas whilst being current internationals. Yes. Danny Nutley played State of Origin 2005, running out for Cas 2006.
Yeah.
And he was a definite State of Origin level player. You watched him play and he was a cut above. He was a cut above what you saw most of the time as a prop forward. And his time here was short and it wasn't a great season, but he was one of the highlights of that season. He was just immense.
Made the dream team, I believe.
Dream team in a team that were relegated.
Yeah.
That's impressive in itself, isn't it?
Impressive in itself, but I think more equally or perhaps more impressive is that they were doing stats by this point and he was the top meter maker in Super League and the top tackler.
Wow.
Now, how does a bloke do that? How does someone have the engine to, in a pretty poor team, be making the most meters in Super League and making the most tackles in Super League? The bloke's just a machine. And it wasn't uncommon for him to from a penalty restart or any kind of tap restart, he'd take drive 1, drive 3 and drive 5 and make meters on them all. And I've not seen any player who has put in that amount of effort and then backing it up with top tackling in defence. So credit to Danny Nutley. Not in the team, but he'd be on the bench.
I tell you what, it's some rap on the 2 props you've got in.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah. So first prop that is in Lee Crooks. Just so different, particularly of his era. His ball playing ability was just out of this world. The way he could get a ball out of contact, no other prop forward was doing it at the time, I don't think. Most props were battering rams. And Crooksy could be a battering ram, but he was so much more than that. And he used to get that ball out so late in contact. He'd almost be tackle complete and the ball would pop out. And it wasn't just popping out randomly. It was popping out to, it was deliberately being put to the support player. Obviously, a lot of appearances, Great Britain international during his time at the club, captain of the Regal Trophy final, goal kicker extraordinaire. So yeah, in terms of ability and a player you really enjoy watching because he made so much happen, Lee Crooks goes in at number 8.
Yeah, completely understand that one. A fair bit of longevity as well with Crooks, as you say. He obviously started, I'm looking now, way back in 1980 for Hull FC. Obviously made 200 appearances there. Obviously had his stint in Australia. Obviously with the way the seasons went there back in the day. Obviously Western Suburbs, played for Balmain as well. Got big raps down there. Well regarded. Lee Crooks, isn't he, down under? As one of those players that went over. Only played 40 games down there, but still one of those players talked about to this day. Obviously, another one of those that, tell the old book there with a stint at Leeds, obviously, but crucially played most of his games for Cas, 222 games for Castleford. And the one thing that sticks out to me and Adam, I think, for Crooksy is obviously because, he retired in 1997. That's the year I was born. So obviously, I didn't have too much time to see him as a player. I love a prop forward who can kick a ball.
Yeah.
I love a goal kicking prop.
It's the one thing I was just thinking about, because I know we spoke about it in my 13, talking about obviously Chubbs, who went on to be a goal kicking prop forward, and Westy as a goal kicking loose forward. I feel like Crooks is the one that sticks out in my mind as the iconic
Yeah. And off sand as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None of this modern technology
Nah.
with cones.
No, just get a dollop of sand on.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. He was the youngest ever Great Britain Test forward as well. I mean, again, we talk about longevity. That's 15 years before he retired. Remarkable career for Lee Crooks.
In that era as well.
Yeah.
In that era.
In that era where they were taking
Playing
things
prop.
off, yeah, sensational, absolutely sensational. Lee Crooks absolutely deserves that number 8 shirt in this team, which brings us to number 9, the hooker role. One of the toughest ones, I think, certainly for me and Adam. I'm sure it's the same for you.
Yep. And again, like I said at the beginning, you had one from 2. I've got to pick one from 3 because I think you've got Paul McShane and Darrell Clarke, but you had Aaron Raper into this mix here. Aaron Raper was a phenomenal hooker. Distribution, he could fly a ball from that ruck half the width of the field. His distribution was absolutely incredible. He could run from the ruck, and again, in an era where that maybe wasn't as common, and your hooker wasn't picking up and going, he used to be able to, certainly his kind of trademark move to pick the ball up from the ruck, step round the ruck, and then pass the ball on rather than just distributing it straight from the floor. So Aaron Raper certainly comes into contention, I think, from my time watching Cass. But I've gone for Paul McShane. Just
2 votes for Macca. 2 votes for Macca out of 3 so far.
Yeah, hard. But I think when you look at Paul McShane compared to Darrell Clarke, his game's just more varied. So Darrell Clarke, blistering pace, very effective, pick up from the ruck and go. Beyond that, he's a decent player. But Macca, he's got everything. So maybe not that pace out of dummy half to burn everybody, but he picks and chooses his moments, and his intelligence means that he sees that retreating defender still as well as Darrell Clarke does. But I think he brings with it that distribution is probably better than Darrell Clarke's. His guile is better, I think. His kind of tactical awareness and making sure he makes the right play at the right time. I'm kind of thinking, remember that cup game away at Hull KR? The try he scored in the semi-final in 2021 against Warrington at Lee, just, I think, gives him the edge over Darrell Clarke. Just that more varied game, and that guile and that tactical play that maybe Darrell Clarke doesn't have, even though he's still a fantastic player at what he does. I think Paul McShane edges it.
Yeah, understandable. It's a great pick. The current captain getting into this team. Interesting to hear about Aaron Raper as well, part of that 99 team, I believe, who were so good. And obviously, probably very unlucky, really, not to end up with silverware, really, back in 99. Yeah, Macca gets the vote. I'll let you go, Adam, because obviously I did go Clarke for reasons that if you've not listened to my episode, do head back and listen. But yeah, Paul McShane.
Yeah, the intelligence of Macca, just his rugby brain is arguably one of the top 5 in Super League and has been for the last few years. I would quite easily argue his game management's second to none, and it's no shot that we look at a damn sight better team when he's on the field than when he's missing. And until sort of even this year, when he kind of dropped out the team before Liam Horn came in, we looked a little bit lost in that 9 shirt and in and around that play of the ball. I know we had some guys kind of try and fill his boots, but despite him being,
I think it was understated. It was understated how much we missed Macca this year.
Yeah.
I think,
despite him being small, he's got some big boots to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited about Macca this year, going to 2024 as well. And
good to see him back.
Yeah, obviously a fully fit McShane. Obviously, we've seen him a little bit in preseason photos and stuff. He looks in good nick. He looks ready to go. Obviously, testimonial year as well. So he'll want to make a good impression. And I dare say the addition of Danny Maguire to the coaching staff will be wonderful for him. I think they're good mates anyway, but just that kind of brain trust, as you say, the intelligence there. Danny Mag's intelligence there. We've heard a video today about of Danny Mag's getting mic'd up at training. You can already kind of hear it. I think Mac is the word he says the most in that minute and 10 seconds we saw. They're going to have quite that relationship, I think. And obviously the fact there's a couple of halfbacks coming through there as well in Rowan Milnes, obviously Danny Richardson coming back, and that kind of connection he's going to have with those guys. Really, really excited about Macca going forward into 2024. But yeah, for what he's put on the field already, what he's already got down in the book, he absolutely deserves to be in one of these teams. So he's in at 9. The other prop, number 10. Who we got, Steve?
This is the player who went in today because I'd got him down as one of those to mention, but not in the team. And the more I thought about it, and the more I kind of made notes and thought, yeah, this is what I'm going to say about this player. He forced his way in because I can't leave him out because this team is around who you've enjoyed watching the most. And that's not to minimise his ability, because another Great Britain international, an England international, but 10, Dean Sampson.
Love it.
Dean epitomises Cass, and did for many years. Such a long playing career, one club man, lived and breathed the club. And that's not to underestimate how good he was, because in that era where props were, the physical challenge really was the props job. Win your physical battle against your opposition props. Never a backward step. And unlike Lee Crooks, he's never passing that ball. That ball is going under his, Valpro taped up arm, and he is running straight and hard at whatever's in front of him. And never did you see Dean get dominated in attack or defence. He was always winning that physical battle. And he was a cult hero, at the time. He was absolute cult hero. And the crowd got louder. Every time Dean got the ball, the crowd raised, go on Dean, and you could hear it. And Dean fed off that, and the crowd fed off Dean. And I don't think I've seen a player with that sort of connection between the crowd and the player on the pitch. Dean would maybe get in a bit of fisticuffs or knock someone backwards or take a massive drive, and the crowd would go up, and that fired Dean up, and Dean would then fire the crowd up, and you had this circle of crowd and Dean Sampson just each egging each other on and raising each other. And I've never seen that connection between player and crowd in any other player, where that would go on in the game. And whenever he got into a little bit of a scrap or conceded a penalty or whatever, that chant Dino, Dino, Dino would go up, and he'd feed off it, and then next time he'd be going in even harder, and he just never stopped. He was relentless, and he was an absolute joy to watch and be part of that connection between a player on the pitch and the people in the crowd. So yeah, that he was one of my favourite players. He had some great moments. Hat trick against St Helens, away at Saints. Often scored hat tricks. I say often, not as often as the likes of Greg. For a prop, he got a fair few hat tricks, did Dean, and a fair few tries, because he just runs straight and hard, and you're not beating him in a physical battle. I remember once he broke the line against Warrington, and I think it was either Lee Penny or Lee Breers at fullback, and there was no deviation from Dean. He just ran over him. He literally trampled him at fullback, and that kind of, it just leaves him crumpled on the floor, because Dean, even one-on-one, is not stepping. He's not looking to pass. He's just going to run over whatever's there. So some really big moments. There's that classic hit on the Halifax player. Massive moment that, the game was in the balance. The club season was in the balance, and we were losing. And Dean puts a monster hit on, I think it was Ollie Martins. Wins the ball back. Ball gets shipped out to the winger to score. Massive moment. And he just, those duels with Kelvin Skerritt, they were stuff of legends. My daughter plays in a rugby union team where we live now, and I wore a Cass jacket to pick her up from training once, and their coach said, "Oh, Cass Tigers, Dean Sampson. Who was that bloke that he used to beat up all the time?" And it was like, even people who weren't kind of into rugby league, and they knew about this duel of Dean and Kelvin Skerritt. So yeah, one of my favourite players. Just that relationship between the player and the crowd. I've never seen anything like it. And therefore, and over 400 appearances. Impressive
going to point
considering
that
how
out.
long he was banned. He was banned fairly often, and he's
Yeah.
still second on the list for most
Yeah.
cast appearances.
I
So
was
yeah,
just going to bring that up. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
I think the
big
connection with the fans alone would be enough to get him in this team. But yeah, I
Oh.
mean, don't get me wrong, going off Wikipedia, so it might not be 100% accurate, but they've got it down as 431, which is an unbelievable amount of games, not least, as we mentioned with Truxy, for a prop forward in that era where Kelvin Skerritt had a target on his back.
Yeah.
It's quite something. And I mean, talk about longevity. Dean Sampson is someone I remember just about. I mean, he retired, I think he played his last game in 2004, 2005, somehow. He made his debut in 1987. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous at that position. But yeah, he's someone I'm just about old enough to remember playing his final games, and I think he then went on to coach the academy team as well. After that, or maybe doing it at the same time. Remarkable player, and again, just one of those names is just synonymous.
opposition fans hated him as well, didn't they? He was a real pantomime villain. But it's a sign of a good player, isn't it? When the opposition fans hate you.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that Chantadino, yeah. I remember it. And Diesel as well. Like there was Diesel, didn't they? So you got any memory? You just about got a memory?
I'm similar to you. It's literally the back end, but his impact on the team, sort of as a player, is one that's always talked about. So you've always got somebody mentioning him in and around these sorts of discussions when you're talking about all-time great cast players.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise.
100%. And just looking at the appearances total, like I say, 431, he's tied with Arthur Atkinson. If we can get someone on who can talk to us about Arthur Atkinson, that's the real dream. But way back in 1935, that really would be something. But I just mentioned very briefly a player who I don't think is going to make your team. I think we've gone past his particular position. How did John Joyner make 613 appearances, by the way? That is just
incredible, yeah. I mean, I guess in the days where you were playing weekend midweek, 3 competitions. If you were a top player and you were resilient, then potentially you could get there. But even so, massive achievement.
Amazing, and I'm sure John Joyner will end up in one of these teams.
Surely.
As we go down the line. Okay, incredible front row, back row, number 11.
This is where I had to make a change to get Dean in. So, I had Dale Fritz in here.
Okay.
And I've taken him out. So Fritzy, brilliant. Briefly touch on him. Defensively, the best player I've seen. Hits hard, went hunting, good in big games, really consistent. A real team always needs a Dale Fritz to do the dirty work. But this isn't a real team, so I'm afraid he came out to accommodate the bloke who came away from prop, which was Grant Millington.
Yeah.
So to get Dean in the team, kind of out goes Dale Fritz, in comes Melo into the back row. Just an incredible all-round player. Could do the tough stuff, but it is a halfback in a prop's body, isn't he? Could do the tough stuff. Could play up top. Could take the hard yards. Could take the hard carries. Good in defence, but when you needed him to, he could really play in terms of ball play. So particularly before contact, like Lee Crooks, you talk about his ball playing post contact, but Milo pre-contact, being able to play right at that line and in the millisecond before contact spin that ball away and then get smashed usually and just get up and carry on. Incredible ability and probably the best forward I've seen in terms of their ball handling pre-contact.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of a better one. I really am. And that's across all the Super League teams as well, to be honest. Certainly cast players, but show me a better one. In Super League in the last 10, 15 years, I really can't think of one. It's testament to Milo, isn't it, that Steve has taken the Adam Hughes approach, that you've simply got to get him in somewhere because he's that important. He's that synonymous with his team over the last 10, 15 years. And yeah, again, it's very, very difficult. We talk about Rangi. Rangi is going to be very difficult to not have in this team. I think this is proof that Millington's a very, very tough name to get out of this team as well. And I almost dare someone to come on and not put Grant Millington in the forward pack, and they're gonna have to convince us there, aren't they?
Yeah, sorry, Adam, go on.
I'm going to say I dare him to come on and not berate him and make him really justify the decision not to put Mello in here.
Well, I'm glad I didn't leave him out and leave Dale Fritz in there. I mean, the other bloke I thought about, right? Do you remember Mike Smith? He was
just.
nearly right, because Mike Smith was either like Junior Moores, but on steroids. He was huge, and
allegedly
he could make 250, 300 meters a game, and sometimes he'd be carrying, and other times he'd play like Ryan Bailey did when he was at Cass, and it was real rocks and diamonds. And Mike Smith was one that I'm thinking, should I? Because I remember him some games being phenomenal, but just not quite consistent. But it's not just consistent. He either was rubbish or an absolute beast. So he was a consideration.
We've had a few of those over the years, sadly. See him on the best days.
When he was good, he was good. But he almost got in just on a bit of a, do you know what? You just never knew what you were going to get when you turn up to see Mike Smith play. But you can't put him in ahead of Milo, I'm afraid. Or the other back rower.
Which we'll come on to, which is number 12. I'm interested in what you're going to do with this, because there is one player I'm certain is in this 13. Not entirely sure where he's going to be. Yeah. So who's at 12?
12 to Aronicao.
There he is.
Yeah.
I thought he might be.
Again, he did play in the back row. Not regularly, but did play in the back row for Cass. And even
it's
when he was
team, Steve, it's absolutely fine.
Even when he played 13, he often hit that right edge. He was very much a right edge player, even as a lock. And just the best forward, maybe even player I've seen play for the club. Everything about him, ball handling, his line running, his ability to create something out of nothing, but his defense as well. He would just go around hunting people to smash. He was just an incredibly gifted all-round player, and a real athlete, ahead of his time, really. I think I remember reading his book and him saying when he came to Cass, he wasn't interested in the drinking culture. He wasn't interested in the going out after the game. He was, I would say, the first of the modern kind of era of players who really looked after themselves. And it showed, because he was bigger, faster, stronger, and more skillful than almost any player that was playing alongside him in that Cass team or that he was coming up against. And he was just dominant. He was dominant in many, many games, in attack and defence. And I think the other player to talk around in terms of professionalism was Richie Blackmore, who'd had that same upbringing, hadn't he? So those two coming in really upped that Cass team in terms of the professionalism. I'm not sure it had an impact on everybody, but certainly those two came in with the modern attitude of, this is a pro sport and we need to, make sure that we were in prime physical condition. And that's what he was. He was just in prime physical condition all the time, and was just dominant in most games that he played. And even when he went back to Australia, won a grand final with Melbourne. And a lot of people say he should have been man of the match in that grand final. He didn't get it. I was listening to a podcast with him recently, but there are a lot of people who'd say he was the best player on the pitch in that NRL grand final for Melbourne Storm. But he'd been doing that for Cass for a good number of years. So yeah, Tuara Nikau has to be in that team.
Yeah, another one of these top, just obviously legends, but top international players at the time, as you say, 19 caps for New Zealand. As you say, the fact that 3 years later he's going on and being arguably the best player in one of the iconic games in Australia, the Storm winning it in 99. Unbelievable. And I think we have this thing with Cass as well. I mean, we are a bit romantic about it in the sense that I know I've read some of Tuara's obviously comments, stuff like that. Fell in love with the club and the stadium and everything, the noise and everything in there. He's one of those people who came over and just couldn't believe that probably 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people could make that much noise in the little shed we call home. You know what I mean? It's he really bought into it, and that's why he ended up making 160 plus appearances. It's a remarkable player. That it's a different era, so it's difficult for me and Adam Thomas visualize this absolute behemoth of a rugby league player almost playing for Cass in that kind of time. But yeah, just remarkable and brilliant that we had a player simply that good.
Yeah, I think it says a lot as well. When he came back over and joined Warrington, his last game for Warrington was at Cass,
right?
And obviously he got clapped off the field by all the Warrington fans, and all the Cast fans started chanting his name down at the Weldon Road end, and you could still see he didn't quite understand why those Cast fans were chanting his name. And eventually, you know, he came down to the Weldon Road end and kind of did a lap of honour, but you could see the look on his face, still really humble and not quite sure why all the Cast fans were clapping an opposition player off. But that's the esteem that the guys held in.
100%. And do you know what? I know it's a slightly different era now, 20 years on, but doesn't happen very often. That doesn't happen very. You've got to be a top player to have moved on, come back, and get that kind of reaction. So that is absolutely testament to him. There's multiple players who get a slightly different response when they come back. Let's just say when they come back in different colours. So yeah, just a marker to wear an account, just how important he was, how special he was to the Cast fan base. Again, Adam, one of those players I mentioned it with St. Janelis earlier, and Richie Blackmore, maybe number one in terms of the Cast players I wish I'd seen.
100%. I think he's up there for every fan that wasn't around in that era.
Yeah,
everybody knows the name. We talk about in our upcoming podcast with Steve about sort of players maybe fans, sorry, not maybe knowing too much about the 1986 team, and maybe a little bit of education maybe needed when we get to centenary year. But the name Tuara Nikau is synonymous with Cast. No matter what age you are, people know that name.
Yeah, 100%, and they should do. And they should do simply. So, a remarkable addition to this team, which leaves one final player, the loose forward, number 13, to complete Steve's 13.
Yeah, Adrian Vols. So Volsey, again, like Tuara, was kind of epitomised the Cast team of his era. That 1999 team is very much summed up by the way Adrian Vols played the game. He was tough. His defence was immense. His one-on-one hits were, you could feel them. I remember watching a game, we were away at Huddersfield, and he put a shot on someone quite close to the stand, and it took my breath away how hard that guy was hitting people. He was just immense in defence. His leadership, again, absolutely outstanding, driving standards, but he was good with the ball as well. And I think his reputation as a hard man, as a defensive kind of player, maybe overshadows sometimes how good he was with the ball. Obviously played a fair bit at centre, and of all the Cast players I've seen, I think he had the best cut-out pass to the left winger. So often he would throw that cut-out ball to Richard Gay, I think it was, who was often playing left wing at that point. But whoever was out on that left wing, Volsey could ping that pass from a long way away, and it was flat and straight and so fast that the defence didn't have that opportunity to slide. And he used to do that regularly, and I've not seen a player who could throw that pass, that cut-out ball to the winger, any better than Adrian Vols could. So his ball playing was also really strong as well. But obviously, most remembered for his absolutely, bruising defence, and a lot of Cass's success in 1999 was based on Vals's and Dale Fritz's defensive efforts that kept the opposition to kind of even in their own half, because we were so hard to break down, because those two players were just leading that defence and were all they were making hits that were just rocking teams backwards. 13 for his defensive ability mostly, but also for the attacking threat he has on that left edge was Adrian Vols.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very popular pick. It's going to be a very popular pick at the 13 position, that's for sure. I referenced it on mine that if I'd simply been born a few years earlier, I'm pretty sure he might have made it in my team, to be honest, with all due respect to Joe Westman. I think it is a fair pick regardless. Talk about players, we just mentioned about T, about kind of buying into what Cass is, buying into the club, buying into the Tigers. Is there a better example? Perhaps Milo, but is there a better example really of an Australian coming over who just absolutely loves Castleford? I'm not sure. I mean, it's evident on social media, isn't it? It's evident every weekend Cass play. Valsey absolutely loves it, and to the extent that people were asking him to come over to be coach last year,
Yeah, including me.
and remarkably, he didn't even deny it fully to start with, which was interesting. But yeah, just one of the great imports, isn't he, Adam?
Yeah, he really is, and I mentioned about saying Tawara Nickhouse synonymous with Cass. I know Val's went on and played for a few other teams around West Yorkshire. We'll not mention them.
Yeah, don't know.
But I think his time at Cass is what he's best known for over in the UK for sure. And you just got to see the reaction of the fans still whenever he's mentioned, whenever they get a chance to talk to him on social media, of how much that player is, that guy, never mind the player, the actual guy himself is just loved in and around Cass fans.
100%. We've mentioned it again on a different podcast, which will be out in a couple of weeks, around kind of plans around the centenary in a couple of years, stuff like that. It doesn't even have to be the centenary. If there is a chance to kind of bring some of these players over for games to get them out at half time, that kind of thing, the reaction when Valsey walks out will be unlike anything. Yeah. Obviously,
and of course, Man of Steel winner as well.
Another Man of Steel.
Man of Steel winner, and that's not even top of the list when you're talking about his achievements. We're saying, Man of Steel winner as an afterthought, and actually Cass's first ever Man of Steel winner, and that's something we're saying as an afterthought to describing him as a player.
And I was actually going to say when you originally brought him up that obviously we've been blessed with quite a few Man of Steel winners, obviously over the last 25 years, but arguably the one that epitomises that kind of Man of Steel the most, potentially, out of our guys that have actually won it. Obviously, we've had a couple of hookers in there, but generally the guys who have won it since have been for the more their attacking play, to be fair, or not really defensive efforts. Whereas I think you said yourself, Steve, you think about his defence first and foremost, Valsey just being hard, being just solid as a rock. I think that's really what, maybe not so much nowadays with the point system and all that kind of stuff, but I think that's what the Man of Steel was meant to kind of represent. Originally, that kind of hard-working player. And the fact we had one so early on in Super League as well, only 3 years in 99, just absolute testament to a player. Just an unbelievable 13.
And testament to his character as well, because, I mean, when he started, he got a lot of flack. He got a lot of criticism when he first came over. And he tried playing 6 and it didn't quite work for him. And he was being thrown into a really struggling team, a poor team around him, and he raised the standards, but the fans did not take to Valsey straight away. He got a lot of criticism when he first started, which is kind of, I often say on social media when players are getting a bit of a bag in, if they're fairly new, just remember Adrian Vals wasn't great when he first came over, and look what he did for the club in the end.
I would argue,
and again, another testament to his character and his resilience to kind of go from being kind of somebody who got criticised, and when you're playing for Cass, you hear that criticism right from the stands, to going on to being a club legend and a Man of Steel within that short space of time. Testament to the bloke.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And another player in this pack that you've got, who is an ever-present of all our 3 teams, wasn't necessarily his fault, because unfortunately he was an Ian Millwood signing, but Grant Millerton didn't really pull up any trees in the first year or two. Really, obviously he was actually playing in the second row. I think originally I think he had the 11 shirt. It was okay. I think by his own admission, he was okay in the first couple of years. Similar to Valsey, thrown into a pretty poor team. Obviously, he was in pretty dire straits to the club at that time. Becomes an absolute club legend. I think it's a really good point to end on. I think actually, Steve, you make a great point that can give his lads some chance. Give his lads a bit of a chance. You never know where they can be, and there is the fact that 2 of those players who maybe didn't have the greatest start to life at Cass can end up in a team of all-time Cass greats. Just says it all, doesn't it? That's been amazing. I've loved that. I've loved that episode. Thank you so much for coming on, Steve. I'll run through your team before we let you go. And quite the team it is. Dare I say, fullback Graham Steadman, a backline of St John Ellis, Richie Blackmore, Michael Shenton, Greg Eden, halfback partnership of Rangi Chase and Luke Gale. Front row, Lee Crooks, Paul McShane, Dean Sampson. That's going to cause some damage.
Wow.
Back row of Grant Millington, Tawera Nickhouse, and then locking them all together, Adrian Vowles. Wow. That's not a bad side, is it?
You wouldn't fancy taking that lot on, would you?
No. It's that pack. How scary is that pack?
Terrifying pack. It's an absolutely terrifying pack. It's a brilliant team. I've loved hearing all the stories. That's been absolutely brilliant. I've really, really enjoyed it. once again, thank you for coming on, Steve.
No, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for listening. We've loved recording this episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it. I'm sure you have. It's been a special one. And we'll see you soon. Coif.